Good Friday afternoon to you. I am Dylan Ratigan, and we are here on the West Coast today, gearing up for tonight, where we'll be on Real Time with Bill Maher. More on that a little bit later. But back in New York, the closing bell was sounded on Wall Street, and the stock market, which is like the icing on a sick and dying pig of our debt, looks fantastic thanks to the Federal Reserve's money printing, which artificially creates a buoyancy in the equity markets that could well last for years until the entire thing collapses in the face of the money printing and the fraud on the back end. But in the meantime, it feels good on your 401k. The Dow's over 13,000, the S&P even closer to a record high now. And if those numbers are the only ones you choose to focus on, you're pretty psyched. The economy is back as long as you ignore the trillions of dollars in currency dilution or the lack of investment in innovation in this country, or the lack of employment. All of those things, theoretically, the responsibility of Wall Street, where they get paid a lot of money to invest in good ideas that solve our problems. But who needs to do that when you can steal somebody else's money and then pay the government off to cover it up? That sentiment ultimately reflected in this week's damning public resignation of Goldman Sachs Executive Director Greg Smith. According to his New York Times op-ed, he could no longer stand Goldman's toxic and destructive nature. Hey, when you take away the capital requirements and makes basically credit insurance fraud legal, thank you, Mr. President, what do you expect the culture is going to do? Many within the company on Wall Street criticized Smith for his comments, more as a reflection of airing dirty laundry in public, and not everyone disagreed, however. Henry Goldman III, who's the great-grandson of the former Goldman founder, back when they had capital requirements on Wall Street, Marcus Goldman, telling Business Insider that he thinks Smith's scathing review was actually spot on. Goldman says it's not just at his great-grandfather's firm, however, but he believes the toxic culture has infected all of Wall Street. I would say that the removal of all capital requirements and the legalization of opaque and secretive credit insurance sales to the tune of $700 trillion, and then pretending that's not a problem and walking around like it's all good, may have something to do with that. I want to bring in Phil Angelides, former chairman of the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission. His New York Times op-ed earlier this month poses the question we've been asking since the collapse. Will Wall Street ever face justice? I can't think of a greater justice for Wall Street, Phil, than forcing them to actually use their own money. Think of the Brazilians, where the CEO and the board members are on the hook for what happens. Think about any public market, a stock market, a commodity market, where if I, Dylan Ratigan, want to buy something, I've got to use my own money. And yet Wall Street has legalized this credit insurance to the tune of hundreds of trillions of dollars, where they don't have to put up any money as long as they're too big to fail in AAA. And then we're all sitting here scratching our heads wondering why it's screwed up. I feel like we're the ones who are screwed up.
Well, look, Dylan, this letter from Greg Smith this week shouldn't be surprising. We've seen almost no change in the culture since 2008 because, let's be frank about it, Wall Street was spared the consequences of its recklessness by trillions of dollars of bailout by the U.S. government. You know, people always point to TARP, the $700 billion bailout, but in the end, the taxpayers fronted essentially trillions of dollars through 24 separate programs to save Wall Street and save, for example, Goldman Sachs, which was circling the drain in the week after Lehman. You know, they went from having about $120 million cash on hand to about $57 million. They were saved by a direct infusion of over $100 billion in assistance from the U.S. taxpayers in the weeks following the Lehman collapse. And we've seen almost no correlation between who's paid the price for this crisis, American working families, and who drove this crisis, which were the firms on Wall Street like Goldman that acted in a reckless manner. And I think most troubling to the American people, there's really no sense of justice in the wake of this crisis. No feeling that our justice system has adequately investigated and pursued the wrongdoing that brought our economy to its knees.
I do want to, Phil, stay with us. I want to bring in business consultant Patrick Lencioni. He's a New York Times best-selling author with a new book coming out next week called The Advantage, Why Organizational Health Trumps Everything Else in Business. And Patrick, picture two organizations. One where I'm a bank, and my goal is to invest or lend my money. And if I invest and lend my money in a way that is prosperous for my investments, I make money. And another business where I simply sell insurance on other people's money, don't have to post any collateral, and then when the insurance claims come in, somebody else pays. Would those two cultures create different organizational cultures as well?
Well, sure, the realities of the business they're in and the government regulations and the stipulations that they have to run their business by, that makes a huge difference. For me, though, what I find interesting in all this, we can speculate all we want on the motives of this guy, Greg Smith, and of Goldman Sachs, but when we talk about a corporate culture that's toxic, I think it's time we recognize that is probably the single biggest advantage a company has is their culture. And more leaders have to realize that if they don't take specific steps to keep their organizations healthy, if they don't see this as something rigorous and real that affects their business, but instead as something cosmetic or public relations, this is the kind of thing that happens. Now, if the culture there is in fact toxic, then I think that they're going to get punished in the market. If it's not, and this letter was written for other reasons, then they're probably going to rebound, and it's going to be interesting to see. But I certainly hope they're taking it seriously.
You know,
well,
maybe
I just weigh
go
in?
ahead, Bill. Sure, please.
Well, I was going to say punished in the market if there are real consequences, but putting aside, people may argue about one individual, but let's be clear. If you look at our report, the Financial Crisis Inquiry Report, the very kind of conduct that Mr. Smith talked about was extraordinarily well documented by us in 2008. Dan Sparks, the head of the mortgage unit, as the mortgage market turns south, Goldman starts unloading a lot of its bad product on its clients, and he's saying in emails about how the team did a great job of taking some very big lemons and turning them into lemonade. After Goldman decides that the mortgage market is in steep decline, they offload their toxic product to their clients, and then they create, during the same time frame, another $25 billion in mortgage securities and sell them to their clients and investors. So this is the culture of this company, well documented beyond one individual. What Mr. Smith's reminded us of is not much has changed in 4 years.
But the government's complicit in that.
Yeah, well, I guess that's kind of the point. So if you have the government creating a basically legalized accounting fraud in the way the banks actually account for their underlying assets, if you have the government saying that you do not have to post collateral if you're a AAA-rated financial institution and you want to issue hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of swaps, and even if you crater the entire Western economy, we will simply give you the accounting fraud relief that you need if you pay us enough with political donations, and we will not force your corrupt credit default swap market into the light of day along with everything else that's already in public. Basically, if you sent a child to Las Vegas and had them gamble with somebody else's money and keep the winnings, and they lost all the money, and you just gave them 10 times more, I'll go back to my original question. Who's the moron? The American people and the government, or the bankers who keep stealing our money, Patrick?
Well, I think that I don't know why this letter was such news. As you said, it's a reminder, but we've known these things for quite a long time.
Right.
So I don't know exactly why this is such news. These points that we're talking about now, we knew this 4 years ago.
Right.
We knew it before that.
Well, and by the way, Dylan, you make a... Okay, very quickly. I mean, I just want to say you're right about capital standards. Frankly, why go through all the hassle of making a small business loan where you got to post about 8% in capital reserves when you can have highly speculative leverage bets with almost no capital? So that needs to be changed, but also there needs to be real investigation, real prosecution, real consequence for wrongdoing. And unless that's there, we're not going to see any change in the culture.
Right. But isn't it time? I mean, it's 2012. I quit CNBC coming out of the financial crisis 4 years ago. There's been myriads of books written, not the least of which my own over the past few months. This has been talked till we're blue in the face. Yeah. Why don't we just come to terms with the fact that we have no interest as a government or as a culture in changing this? It's almost as if we're talking about how smoking and not going to the gym and eating fatty foods is terrible for us, but then every day we smoke a pack of cigarettes, eat Kentucky Fried Chicken. No offense to Kentucky Fried Chicken. We're sitting here like, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. No. We know exactly what to do. We just have absolutely no interest in changing our behavior. Heck, Phil, they only gave you $8 million or whatever it was to do your. They don't even want to know what you have to say. So why don't we just come to? Why don't we stop pretending? My goodness me, oh my Lord, when we have the information, we just don't want to change our behavior because it will disrupt the flow of capital between the banks and the politicians. The politicians don't want to deal with it. The banks obviously don't want to deal with it. And the rest of the world can honestly screw off. Let's just come to terms with that, and we can just relax into our afternoon, you know?
And remember
Well,
where a lot of Goldman Sachs execs work now is in the government.
Yeah, it's a joke.
But we
Phil,
can't, Dylan. Yeah, we can't accept it because it's so destructive. You let off with, I think, a very good point. This financial system is no longer about providing capital to build jobs and enterprise and wealth. It's a system of money making money, and ultimately that's extraordinarily destructive.
Yeah, and we all know it. The government knows it. Everybody on Wall Street knows it. And nobody wants to do anything about it. So that's okay. I mean, listen, I don't want to quit smoking. Wow. I like smoking cigarettes. It's giving me cancer. I don't want to quit. We know we've got a corrupt banking system that is extracting trillions of dollars from America. We don't want to deal with it. So some people don't have jobs or food. What are you going to do? It's a sad day. Thank you, guys. For me, with my smoking, and America with its banking system. Coming up here on the DR Show, away from our